Hey, it's 42, and this will be a video on my 5 ancestry test. I'm also doing a quick preview for a video that I'll do just on overall population genetics, and I'll refer to that video frequently as I go through this. So I want to show people some of the basics because we get a lot of things wrong. I mean, the thing that sticks out the most is the Caucasian race thing. That's something like, I know there's a big Angel Rodriguez video on that. I haven't really watched it, and I don't plan on watching it. I don't feel like watching it. It just, that ain't really me. So that will not get watched. It's just, I know it's not the business, because like Western Europeans aren't even Caucasian like that. You know, they really aren't. It's just pseudo buzzword terminology, and nobody's really demonstrated this, and it gets easy. So I'm going to go into that. And I hear people saying it all the time, like young Pharaoh, peace, 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 family, peace, 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 peace. He's like, he spits when he talks. And then it's like the Caucasian, you know, and people use it. Meek Mill got out of jail, he was using it. Corey Holcomb, he used it all the time. So I hear a lot of people that'll say Caucasian. Like just now, Drake Nasheed posted a video of these people from the Caucasus Mountains walking on all fours. It's like, okay. They got this back element, but I don't really see not many other people with their back element. You know, where you hubble all the way over. So I get that there's some jovialness. It gets kind of funny with the pseudoscience. But if you know where the word came from, you know it's just some shit that they made up. Some Germans made up. And Germans really ain't related to Caucasians. They up in West Europe, and very distant genetically. Put up a little preview of what I'll go into when I get on the bottom of that video. Another example, I was on Almond Rod Facebook group, chatting with somebody. I'm gonna name drop. Linda Mendea Montequita. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not certain. Excuse me, I'm eating orange. It was good orange. Got a little coconut milk. I like the coconut milk. Linda Mendea Montequita, she was talking about how she had a conspiracy belief that haplogroup M and N, I'm talking on the woman's side, that haplogroup M and N did not come from L3. She was on some pseudo stuff, talking about it came from some egregious or some gold marts, some Neanderthals, or something, anything, but it didn't come from us. I'm like, why would it have a different name if it didn't come from L3? I'm like, because they changed the name. Because most of the M went out into Asia. But before it went to Asia, it was big in Africa. It's still big in Africa. You know, I'm trying to explain that to her. And N is big in Africa. N is like all around the outskirts, but it's seeds. The seeds of N are strong, like R is all over Kenya. I is strong in the Sudan. H is big up in West Africa. You know what I mean? We was bringing H and U to the Americans without meat mixing with Europeans. And people don't know this, and you gotta teach it to them. You know, and sometimes I get to teaching people and they hard-headed. They don't want to listen. They don't want to learn. You know, if I was the quote-unquote Caucasian, it might be a little bit easier for me to drop it. H is big up in West Africa. You know what I mean? We was bringing H and U to the Americans without meat mixing with Europeans. And people don't know this, and you gotta teach it to them. You know, and sometimes I get to teaching people and they hard-headed. They don't want to listen. They don't want to learn. You know, if I was the quote-unquote Caucasian, it might be a little bit easier for me to drop it. You know, but that's the sad part about it. But I know everybody not like that. So if you're not like that, you'll get learned today. Well, not today, when I do the video. Because this video is mostly just going to be about my ancestry test. And I'm going to talk about some of the problems within. I'm here, I'm doing this. We're about to get to my ancestry test. But one more thing. This is also that next video from next in 2 weeks. That'll be for a lot of people who are teachers, and I want them to be better teachers. You know what I mean? I'm not even going to name drop it. They know who I'm talking about. They know exactly who I'm talking about. If you think I'm talking about you, I'm talking about you. So let's get to it. So this is my Net Geo haplogroups right here. Mother's side, father's side. Mother's side through 23andMe. And this is the mother's side, father's side through 23andMe. And if you look at them, they got a different way to judge both haplogroups, to really gauge them. And the reason why there's a different way is because one is European and one is mostly out of the other one is mostly out of Africa. If you look at it, the other one is mostly out of Africa, if you look at the location. But overall, L3 and L, these are huge African lineages that are bigger than all the out of Africa lineages combined. So it's much larger. L3, I would think, is like 100,000 years old. This branch, L3, I think it's L3B1A. Let me double check. I'm not even looking at this. Yeah, L3B1A. That's about 13,000 years old. If you see, it looks like maybe most of it is in Africa, but it does hotspot near Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So maybe that branch is mostly in Africa. But that branch that was a pretty prominent branch among African American women, among West African women. As you can see, it's all over West Africa. It seems to be strongest in Algeria, southern Algeria. You see it in Egypt, Ethiopia, looks like Nigeria a little bit. But it's that old, and compared to that branch on my dad's side, which is supposedly an Irish branch. That branch, if you were to name it the same way, it's a lot longer because it's younger, and a lot of times people don't get that. That branch would be R1, B1, A1, 2A1. They say in Net Geo, or actually I think it's 23andMe, that I'm like 10,000 years removed from Nirel or Niel, this dude. Really, that branch, if you go by Wikipedia, which scales every other branch, and if anything, Wikipedia stretches things to longer than they really are. So if you go by their middle end, that branch is like 6,000 years old compared to L3B1A, which is part of a much longer overall haplogroup. Because overall, L3, I'm saying, is at least 100,000 years old. And you could research that and go by, why you think it might be longer or shorter. There may be some debate with that, which would be good because, educate me on that. But I'm saying, I generally think the haplogroups in Wikipedia are a little bit younger. There are different ways of estimating it, and I look at who does it, how they do it, and what discernment skills I have is how I base my ideology, my ideas at least, my theories. I think they're a little younger. But they are rounding up, talking about this haplogroup, and they got to name it different. The RM269, let's see, how does Net Geo, they name it RD. So it's ways to abbreviate that long ass R1, B1, A1, 2, 2, like all that. Because if you look at Wikipedia, they say the possible place of origin for R1, B1, A1 is 4,500 to 9,000. Well, you add like all these other branches with that A2, A1 to get to this RD I think it's RD719. No, RDF19. To get to that, you got to add up. You got to add branches. That means it's younger than Wikipedia's estimates for one that's already younger than that. Like Wikipedia's estimates for R1B1A1, like I said, I'm thinking I go by their low end, so I would say it's closer to 6,000. Well, this is younger than 6,000. And the reason why they can't go far back on the R haplogroup is it goes back to Africa. But that's kind of a long story because it also goes to Asia. It's stronger. Early R branches are stronger in Negritos. Like it goes to Black Asia. Like the few Black people they would call. And it also, and it's not just that, it also goes to the Americas, some of the early branches. But the ancestor branches to R, the ancestors branches to R's ancestors branches, all the way back to everything, all of that is in Africa, deep within, with people who are related to African and not necessarily people outside Africa, which Africa does have. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm thinking R came out of Africa. Could be wrong, but it would really take a bizarre scenario for R to be some sort of back migration haplogroup, because it's deep within Africa with multiple branches, even though one, R1B, sticks out way more than others, which does pose some questions. That might mean that maybe there is some bizarre scenario. Not certain. But the fact that you have other branches there, you have ancestor branches there, and R1B is deep and early, that to me, so it points to Green Sahara and Calamity. Oh no, we got to get out of the block. Well, let's go to these islands. And then if you look at Europeans, where they're strongest genetically, it's in areas that are close to Africa. So let me keep it moving. Those are my haplogroups. And just that you have, it's so high resolution, 23andMe, that it's naming a dynasty for something that's really recent. You know what I mean? That really is not a huge haplogroup, but that's what happens. Europeans, if all you were going to go by is 23andMe, you could discern white supremacy if you were alien new on the solar system. Like if you just looked at 23andMe thoroughly, and you were playing a thought experiment, you could see what was up, because this thing is so high resolution that it's naming people, and it's zooming in on a 24,000-year-old, I think R is haplogroup, to like the last, they say 10,000 years. Bullshit. I'm related to the Niels, the European side of my family, the Lamoxihus. Niel, of the three hostages, that is like that's medieval times. This is a medieval haplogroup. I would not be surprised if it is. And all this is young. This is new on the block in Europe, man. You know. So it makes me think maybe I should do, because I haven't done African ancestry, like Rick Kittles' ancestry test. Because, you know, the ABOs, like I said, are a little bit right on the subject that just pure haplogroup tests don't really give you the business. They give you a very small portion of your ancestry. Now, it's true, though. If you have an African haplogroup and you're mostly African, there is a somewhat of a okay chance as an African American that, let's say, you came from let's say a quarter of your ancestry comes from one tribe. If it's the same tribe as the haplogroup, you're getting a pretty nice ancestry test on a portion of who you are. I think that's good, but you have to do it in conjunction with something else. So I might get one, but the rest of my family members are going to have to kick now, because this is about as far as I would get on the my dad's side of the family. You know, is Niel. Really. So a high resolution test on my mom's side, or my My granddad's side, on her side, would give me 2 Africans, most likely. I mean, my granddad had pretty strong African features on my mom's side, and so did my grandmom's kind of, between. Like, I know where the European came from in my family. It's my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather he didn't look necessarily Irish, and genetically, I'm actually not that Irish when I look at the European side of me. But he said he came from Ireland, and the haplogroup goes to Ireland. I think that's interesting. And he liked mixed chicks, and that became my great-grandmother, or my grandmother, my great-grandmother, who then produced my grandfather, who then produced my father. My father kind of looked like Maxwell. You know what I mean? Like maybe a little bit more like Lenny Kravitz, maybe. Kind of that type of complexion and phenotype. My mom looked like, most African-American women, like chocolatey, just kind of tall. So they produce somebody who ain't passing as nothing but black in countries that have black races. Maybe if I was in Egypt, I could be like, I'm a Berber. You know what I mean? Just because they try to whitewash Egypt. But, in places where they got black people, I'm black. Or I could say I'm a Nubian in Egypt. But I'd be black anywhere else. So don't let Niall of the 9 hostages fool you. I read about him a little bit. So we're going to keep it going. This is S&P analysis. One thing I want you to notice is that if you look at DNA tribes, they move a portion of the European to North Africa, where other people don't. And I think the reason why they do it is that haplogroup. Because that haplogroup, remember, this is my mom, my mom's mom, my grandmother, all my aunties. This is my family. You know what I mean? This is my family. I'm related strongly to that haplogroup because I'm related to all the women on my mom's side of the family that have it. So, I'm thinking, again, I may be getting that test from Rick Kittles, but it's true. Family moves around. I'm not heavily related to Niall. Like, if it goes back, but, you know what I'm saying? I'm curious about who has this haplogroup in West Africa. If it's only like a few tribes, that narrows it down. Plus, I've got other tests I'm getting to. And it would collaborate with other tests, especially if it said on Balanta, because as I get to the other tests, it does start to point to Balanta. The strongest resolution with the STR test on DNA tribes. But this is DNA tribes SNP. And notice how they kind of move it over. They also, another thing DNA tribes does that's novel of them is they will give you your Jewish blood wherever people you're related to practice Judaism. They will say you're a Jew if you want to be a Jew. They don't discriminate on Jew. They don't just say, oh, it's the Ashkenazis, it's the Sephardians. Wherever people practice Judaism, they will say you're a Jew. I like that. DNA tribes is woke. I might talk a little bit more about DNA tribes near the end. This is GAD match. I took 23andMe. I had a GAD match. But like if you look at my 23andMe and NetGeo, it puts it in Europe. But so this is like GED match, it depends on which one. This is Ethiohalix. It puts some of the European, like if I use French as a proxy, it puts it in North Africa too. And I think they're claiming branches L3 is European because back migration is stronger in Turkey. That's why I try to tell people, you're going to let them back migrate L3, M, and you don't let them back migrate. All these haplogroups are in Africa. Say what you want to say, however you want to say it. Not me. If it's mama's mama, daddy, and daddy are all in Africa, why do we need it to have left and came back? And that's the thing. Like with DNA tribes, before they were taken off of Wikipedia, I might as well say this now, they were starting to show where Europeans come from. But the reason why they were taken off of Wikipedia was all because of King Tut and them ancestry tests, man. Nefertiti's ancestry tests. They did it, and they were like, oh no, we got to take, and it was one dude. I chronicled it in the third video of the truth of ancient Egyptian genetics. One dude took down DNA tribes, but the thing I didn't mention in the video is DNA tribes was on the cuffs of, forget on the cuffs. They did it. They said where everybody come from. All you had to do was look at their analysis, actually, I didn't really get this because I fact checked Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, DNA tribes real cold because I needed to know if they were credible. So I'm looking at the algorithm for how they do the MLI scores. I'm looking at all the times they're cited by people all over the world. I'm looking at who's in their database. Because like when you look at this, the Ethiohalix, their database isn't really that strong for West African. Not really that strong. It's mostly for East Africa. But people are related to people, so they come out and they're like, he's 35, and this is on percentages. 35% West African, and you can see how it breaks down. You can see this. They say I'm Fang, but remember Fang though, a higher test does have Fang high, but not the highest, so I'm thinking they just didn't have the people who I'm really hitting. When they do two populations, they roll that into Igbo, Egypt. And that makes sense. Or Bama French. Now, if you see this, though, it does show that Igbo are closer to Egyptians than Bamoun are to French. It'll throw that North Africa right into Egypt. It gets 15% more than the French. And that seems to be their proxies all the way down. Egyptians, French, Egyptians, French, Egyptians, French. For the double ones. Now, let me go through this. Okay, this is DodoCAD. DodoCAD is from Denikis. Denikis, with him, it's going to be really stronger. It's going to be stronger in how it does European. So I'm not even really looking at the African. I'm looking at what it's hitting with the European. They got Neo-African, East African, Northwest African, Paleo-African. So I'm looking at what it's hitting with the European. And it's like Eastern European, Mediterranean. Because that's what his database is built for. West Asian, some South Asian. And even then, nothing is better at finding what you mix with than S&Ps. SDR tests are best at finding what you are, who you're most related to in the world, period, end of story, drop the mic. That's what SDR tests do. But if you're hella mixed with people all over the place, an SDR test might, especially one that isn't really high res, might put you between two populations that you're mixed with instead of identifying the top population that you are. And it does it even with a higher resolution test. If you generalize it, it'll make every African American a North African. You've got to be damn near 100% Nigerian, and even then it'll give you a little bit of North African. If you got any kind of Fulani scrape, some Hausa, it's going to give you some North African. STR tests, a lot of times they're neighbors. Depends on where you're at. So this is Harappa. Harappa has a high West African score. I don't really go too much in GEDmatch. In context with everything else, I think it works. With Punt DNL, says I'm really close to Fulani, Dominican, African Americans. But how many West Africans are they really, do they have high samples on? Kedrosia says they break it down as 57 Sub-Saharan, early Europeans. Then they separate East Africans with Sub-Saharans. Usually what that means is it's Northeast Africans. So it's like, what do we do with this indigenous European that we don't want to call European? So they call it East African, or indigenous Egyptian, I should say. And then you have 5 caucus, and that's down by percent. See, I got more caucus based on this, which I don't know the database, than Germans. So I'm more Caucasian than Germans. Maybe that's why my back hurt. One thing about population genetics is it is location, 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 location. Okay, let me take the pseudo hat off after that rant. Who is this? This is Eurogenics. And they do the same thing, but they call it Northeast African. What's Northeast African but Egypt? They do the same thing. Like if you go back, they got that 5% East African, and over here it's the 5% Northeast African. Now what that shows you, and this is why, because this is a like at least when it comes to Europeans, so they're and Northeast African, they're because they're trying to get, they're trying to market to the audience that gets the real little in little but long haplogroups with the new names. So they got the population databases, but they ain't gonna call it Egyptian. Northeast African. Actually, DNA Tribes does this too. That half-woke company. They'll call like Horner's Northeast African. And I really do think it comes down to haplogroups that are from Africa, but they're arguing that they back migrate. That's why a lot of this comes down to this. But this is a GPS test to show where you migrated from. It shows who you're related to. It's strange though. Like they consider West Africa to be West Africa, even Algeria. But I think the reason why they do this is because they heat map all of Africa. And since I'm clipping Algeria, which is consistent with the haplogroup, and I'm clipping Morocco, and really strong in Beni Gassal, this is consistent with my high resolution test that you'll see near the end. I'll save the best for last. With that, I think what they do then is they just say, okay, that's part of the West African portion, and they just toss it in. This is GPS home DNA. But as you can see, 23andMe, they don't do that. Their West Africa doesn't include Morocco, and damn sure don't include Algeria. I think they do include Mauritania. So they got some Moorishness built into the West African, because they include Mauritania. And this is my breakdown. I'm strongest in the Bantu and Niger Congo areas by the GPS. Then Madagascar. I've never seen any of them that has Madagascar so high, 13%. But it seems like Madagascar and this soaked up all of my little Asian markers. And if you look at Madagascar has a lot of Asian markers for a place that's technically Africa. It's got a lot of them Pacific Islander markers. And people attribute that to back migration. I don't know about that. Why are people going to go leave Madagascar and come all the way back? It seems like that's just holdover from the people that didn't go who they're related to. Matter of fact, that's how most Africa is. Africa is the root and the early branches of the family tree. It's not just the roots. It's not just the trunk. It's the root, the trunk, the early branches, and some of its own big branches. And like I said, it's the tip of 1 or 2 fingers. The rest of the hand is Africa. So this, I think, is pretty high res. I mean, it's hitting Finso-Scandia. I don't know nothing about Finso-Scandia. I can't do no Finso-Scandian accent, man. I can do my fake little British, but no. And I can't even do that, really. Western Siberia, that must be where I get that Caucasian. That's why I'm Roebuck from Russia. I didn't know I had no Russian in me. I'll go outside and tackle somebody in the snow. Pygmy, that's awfully high. That's an awfully high pygmy rating. And then Nile Valley, which is consistent with that direction, because they say they trace me, and this kind of breaks that whole Bantu migration, which I don't have any evidence of there being a Bantu migration. It's just some stuff that there were migrations and with people who speak Bantu, and they sort of rolled it on to this one unifying thing. And no, I'm not going with it, because I've heard two good arguments against it, and I'm taking a GPS test, and it has me moving through Nigeria. Let me show you. Here's the rest of it. And you got Bass, Southern Levant, Orkney. Yeah, like 3.7% Southern Levant, Northwest Africa. Okay. Peaks in Algeria, declines in Morocco and Tunisia. We got a little Algerian musk, southern Ethiopia, and you see it's going west through Nigeria. And it appears to, because you look at my strongest relation to modern people is Guinea-Bissau. In Europe, it's showing that I'm going northeast. So that's opposite of the European migrations. Because they say the Europeans went up in the cold and turned white. And I disagree with that. I'll cover that in population genetics. I think Europeans were turning white on their way to Europe, but only, not in the major fashion. They were just a highly likely to have really light-skinned group of dark-skinned people. Kind of like what you see in Tanzania, where they have an unusual amount of albinos. So then I'm saying they just came from Africa. Some left through the Sinai, I think it's called, where Palestine and Egypt meet. I don't even call it Israel. Palestine and Egypt meet. They came from that direction. They came through Italy and France. Not Italy and France, Italy and Spain. And then you see people going up from Sweden up into Finland, or past Finland up into Russia. And that's like 600 AD. And you see, if you look at the way both African and European empires moved, the populations were moving from sort of like with Europe, you see them settling in early North Africa, Southern Europe, and Northeast Africa, and then they move up in strength and number, power. In the African nations, they do move more from east to west, with the exception of Dar-Tichet. So in that sense, you could say they move northwest to south. So you do have that, you do have that movement. And then, but I mean, going before all that, I would say just look how close the Sudan is. You have Kerma, Kush, and Chad is where I would have estimated Yam to be. And Chad gets destroyed by desert climate. According to this, the average Haitian is 11% European and 9% Native American. That's just their Haitian standard. And the average Senegalese is 8% European. More European, I'm talking percentage, not necessarily genetic drift. Because if it was genetic drift, then I could see them being more European than Southern African. But percentage, that's a lot of, like, we talking the Senegal. You know what I mean? I know people have come there and mixed with the people, but not to the point where they are 8% European. I think what's happening is they're taking some of the North African in Senegal and rolling that into European, which could also be connected to the haplogroups. I say it's not, but this just could be a way that it's represented. And that's just my theory, because that's a lot of European for the average Senegalese person. I mean, that's damn near halfway to African Americans. So that's kind of suspect, but that's net geo. And another thing that is kind of suspect. But I think there's a more reasonable explanation for it. If you look here, let me show my DNA tribes. I also did a DNA tribes S&P test, and I'll show that before the STR. But if you look, the S&P test, one thing that stands out, and this is the African profile, Yoruba's at the top. When I take the STR test, as you can see, Yoruba doesn't even show. And that's a major difference. That's something that should be explored. I don't really have time to go into it that much or even question it and say, hey, why is this? Even though I might email them and say, hey, this is kind of a stark difference. What do you think this is? Now, we'll see if they answer at all. My theory is that, as you could see with the GPS test, you could have me cruising through Nigeria, and it's saying that I'm related to Bantu groups. Yoruba is not a Bantu group. It's often associated with it, but it's not a Bantu language. They don't speak a Bantu language. So S&P does a really good job at finding out who you're mixed with because it explores who your family mixed with. My theory is that the family did not mix with Yoruba as they went through Nigeria. So I'm related, not directly, but I'm related because people that I'm related to mixed with the heart of Nigeria and Yoruba by proxy of that. That's my theory because STR is more of an absolute value assessment. That's why I think it's better for identifying who ancient populations are related to, because it blocks out all the noise, like in the case of Egypt, with who new populations come and mingle with. Because then that factors, you're invaded by a bunch of people, your relatives mix with those people, and that's where it places you. And not to say S&Ps are bad, because it's better finding what you're mixed with in that breakdown. I think they probably have the most accurate, the S&P rating probably has the most accurate percentages for larger populations. For specific populations, I prefer STR. That's why I did the STR test, and we'll look at that. And it points, in all populations, I'm strongest among African Americans. Well, no surprise there. Bahamas. Well, that ends up being a place where DOS were bottlenecked genetically too. The Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, Haiti, Bahamas, and then you pull back, and I'm strongest among Guinea-Bissau than anybody. 2 Guinea-Bissau populations. Now, because Guinea-Bissau, and I can look at my African panel, and I looked at DNA tribes. One, they have Guinea-Bissau, but they don't have its major ethnicity. They have some of its minor ethnicities, like the Fulani and the Fang. I don't, they're represented. But since Guinea-Bissau is still represented, I would say my strongest relationship would be with the strongest ethnicity in Guinea-Bissau that's not represented, and that's the Balana, who, by their oral traditions, if you can read this, I'll leave it up, say that they migrated westward from the area that is now Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia to escape drought and wars. Guinea-Bissau, also there are significant populations in Senegal. I'll cover a bunch of stuff, and hopefully in a week, if I get everything together, hopefully in a week. Because I just see so many people that just don't know. Like, I'll hear people like ACBN or Sergeant Willie Pete say that North Africa was a miscegenation zone. I would disagree. I would say it was Saudi Arabia. Now maybe I'll talk a little bit more about how DNA tribes is taken down, but I did that in the video, part 3, The Truth About Ancient Egyptian Genetics. Watch that and become an activist. Get into Wikipedia. We need to run that dude off. I mean, the fact that we just let that go, that's sad. It's real sad. That's about it. Those are my major ancestry tests. It would be, if I can get my family to pitch in, it would be nice to look at how African ancestry, a high resolution haplogroup, matches up with all these other ancestry tests. And that may be the move in the future. But for now, I'm going to do a population genetics video. Look out for it. Actually, hold on. You know what? I'm going to set a release date. Where are we? It's not going to be this weekend. I'm going to say December 19th. December 19th. That's what I'm going to target. 9 days, maybe even 18th.